Welcome everyone. My name's James Furman and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Really appreciate everybody that signed up. Looks like we've got a good sized crowd, which is just what we were hoping for. Really excited about what we have on tap for today. I'll be the moderator for today's event. And I'd like to start out by just providing a little bit of historical context. I think that'll help you get more out of the six speakers that we've got coming up. A little bit of background. I'm actually a manager, not a scientist, and this will be a little bit of the world according to James Furman. So maybe a little bias up front, but wanted to let you know I have been in a really unique position during my career as a manager, managing a very active prescribed fire program and wildfire response at Eglin Air Force Base. I managed to be kind of at I guess at the juncture between management and research, because there was a lot of research that we'll talk more about that was done while I was at Eglin, where I had a chance to work closely with a lot of the fire scientists, several of which will be our presenters today. So have kind of been at that point where I talked to these researchers when they were there and really built a relationship so that they understood the challenges that we as managers were facing. So with that, I'll move on to the next slide. So this diagram illustrates a number of events as well as a number of tools that we'll be talking about. And so the gray ovals illustrate events and activities and organizations, and the lighter tan colored blocks represent tools and outputs that resulted from the events and activities that are in the gray ovals. Obviously the arrows represent interactions between those two things. So I'd like to start with the bottom and talk about the Collaborative Research Burns campaign. I mentioned that I worked at Eglin Air Force Base. I was a wildland fire program manager there, worked closely at that time with Kevin Hires, one of our speakers today, who managed the prescribed fire program and our ecological monitoring program. And part of his job was to really integrate science into the management there at Eglin Air Force Base. So, right off the bat, we had a really fertile ground for co-production between managers, myself and Kevin, and scientists. And these collaborative research campaigns, there were a number of them that did involve Eglin Air Force Base. The earlier ones, the RX Cadre, which was prescribed fire combustion atmospheric dynamics research experiment, if you want to get into acronyms, but took place in 2008, 2011, and 2012 at Eglin Air Force Base, as well as a number of other locations in the Southeast where scientists converged. It was bring your own funding, and collaboration between the scientists and data sharing was one of the things that was instigated there. I forget how many research scientists there were, but it was close to 100 at least one of them, but a big event, a number of different research projects working on active fire there at Eglin Air Force Base. Another of the collaborative research burns was the result of the Prescribed Fire Science Consortium, something that Kevin Hires and Joe O'Brien, Roger Otmar, others were involved with. And this was a way to pull together and again involve managers directly in fire science so that the scientists could understand the main questions that managers had and try to figure out the best ways to address them. Another one of these large collaborative research burn campaigns was FASME, the Fire and Smoke Modeling Evaluation Experiment. And another one that we'll talk about that's more recent is the DoD Wildland Fire Science Initiative. The DoD Wildland Fire Science Initiative came in at a time, represents a significant investment in wildland fire research, and it came at a time when funding for the Joint Fire Science Program and other initiatives had been cut back, so filled a really important gap. And in the next slides, we'll talk about these different collaborative research burns campaign and sort of how they provided the I guess the springboard or the foundation for this co-production between managers and scientists that has led to these tools that we'll be talking about more today. So I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, so don't worry about trying to read it all. But on the right-hand side of your screen, I mentioned the DoD Wildland Fire Science Initiative, and this is what I call the spider diagram, something that I put together that shows the interconnections between all of the different current projects within the DoD Wildland Fire Science Initiative. So those projects are represented by the light blue rectangles. There are about a dozen projects here, and off to the side are names of people that are involved in these projects and how they are involved. And I only listed people that were involved, that were either a principal investigator or that were involved in multiple projects, just because this very bottom one, the Integrated Research Management Team, is actually a project that I head up, which is just geared towards providing logistical support for these collaborative research burns, managed sort of like the incident command system. So again, I'm a manager, not a scientist, but I have the opportunity to work very closely with all of the scientists, especially in the DoD Wildland Fire Science Initiative. So you can see just baked into this suite of projects managed by DoD, the amount of collaboration that is in place. You can easily see, folks that are involved in multiple projects, sometimes as co-principal investigators or collaborators, but a lot of synergy built into these projects. So the boxes on the left are the gray ones that you see at the bottom, again, are those collaborative research burns, FASME, Prescribed Fire Science Consortium, RxCadre, and this shows their tie-in with the DoD Wildland Fire Science Initiative, as far as many of these same people are involved and have been involved in these other collaborative research burns. So again, a lot of synergy and a lot of input from managers throughout this process. So real important to understand that, again, at the foundation is co-production with managers through these collaborative research burns, and that has led to the development of these tools, QuickFire, Fast Fuels, and BurnPro 3D, among others that we'll be talking about as we go through the rest of the presentation. So here I've highlighted our speakers for today and eliminated all of the connection lines that are not associated with them, but you can see that our speakers for today are very, very clearly involved in all of these collaborative research burns, as well as development of these tools that we'll be talking about today. So here's a cleaned up version of the last slide that we looked at, just showing the connections between our presenters for today and the events and tools that we'll be covering. So the format for today, as I mentioned, we've got 6 speakers. They'll each have 10 minutes to present, followed by 5 minutes of Q&A. You can participate either by raising your hand or putting questions in the chat. If we don't get all the questions answered during the 5 minutes of Q&A following the speakers, we'll address those in the panel discussion there at the end. But just want to say that I'm very excited to be able to offer this to everyone today. And with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker.